That I seen that concert and I knew I need to readdress how I see solo kora as a player, as a composer, and not be confined, not just have the traditional music of the kora as a reference, but start again from scratch.
What was the first live performance that you heard?
It should have been when Bob Marley was at the Rainbow, because I was supposed to go to that, and I couldn't because I was too young. But I felt, because he came to Keskadi, which is where my father worked, and everyone was going to that concert. I think it was the famous one at Rainbow. And I knew that I was also going to it, and they were like, no, you can't. And I was very gutted. And now I'm more gutted because I know how important a concert that was. But I think at 5 it was difficult to get in.
There was an English orchestra that came to Trinidad sometime in the 60s. And they played a piece, I think it was something by Britain, that had a lot of pizzicato in it. And I think actually the whole orchestra, the whole of the string section were either strumming or playing pizzicato. As soon as I heard that, I literally jumped from my seat. And I love that. That sound, just hearing that sound coming from the orchestra, I think was probably, yeah, looking back on it now, it's probably the most inspiring sound that just made me think, I want to write sounds like that.
I don't think there was a particular performance that encapsulated that essence of, you know, this is why I want to become a musician. It was more of an intrigue as to coming from the sort of performance side of things. I was a violinist, and I, as a kid, went to a lot of performances that involved a soloist, so violin solo or playing concerto with orchestra or solo recital. At that point, it was the technique that these musicians had, you know, to learn from them, to see how they did things.
The first musical concerts, I think, I remember going to there were some concerts they used to have at Festival Hall, which was the Robert Mayer concerts, I think, which were concerts for young people, but the whole orchestra would perform some classical work, and they would stop and then explain it, and then the orchestra. So it was particularly for young people. It was quite early in the morning. My mum used to take me to those. So those were live musical experiences. At the time, some of them were a bit boring for me, because as a kid, you're like, I could be playing football on the road.
I took away from maybe not even realising what I was doing at the time, but growing up, it's very important to work with performers as a composer. And many of my early works were directly involved with working with a particular musician and learning what they could do, how I could write them a piece that sort of reflected their musicality in the best sort of way. So in that sense, it was very useful to work with those individuals to create pieces that really showcased their instrument, what they could do. And I think I got that from being a violinist myself, but also learning and analysing how things worked for a particular sort of instrument or the way someone played.
I remember one that had a very strong impact on me was they played Rite of Spring. I think they played on 2 pianos or something. But I just remember I went to that concert and they were playing this music. I was like, wow, what is this music? This is like, wow, this is different from last week. Mozart or whatever. This is not Mozart. I don't know what this is, but yeah, this is. So it's funny what things stay with you. And I didn't know what it was. And then years later I knew, it was that piece. I knew that's the piece it was. It was a Rite of Spring. And it has an immediacy from someone, especially if they're coming from another tradition, that it connects. That was influential. And then I think, I don't know, because I went to a lot of concerts. I saw my kora master Amadou Bansang play. I was probably about 8. So I wouldn't know which one was first. But there were a lot of concerts. that I went to from quite early, from 7 or 8. I was at concerts.
So who's your favourite composer?
I can't say a favourite. I like people like, I like Debussy because of the way he pushes around sound and musical ideas. I like Bach. Kind of the spiritual angle of things. There's a choral composer. Is it Lawrenston? I can't remember if I pronounced it correctly. Sure on this shining night. Just the way he's worked the words, music, text.
I don't have a fixed sort of favourite composers. I have favourite sort of pieces or works by people, but yeah, it's too difficult to sort of narrow it down to one person or one style of music, whether that's classical or otherwise.
I can't pin it down to one particular artist, but I do like artists like Wynton Marsalis and Kathleen Battle, who have this eclectic approach to doing things. He'll compose his pieces like All Rise, choral, and have a very eclectic array of African American musical influences. And then he'll go and do his Baroque duet with Kathleen Battle, and she'll do her spirituals. I do find those kind of eye-opening kind of performances as to how people use musical technique to sing anything, really.
I have to put two together, Bartók and Ravel, for me.
Which one was first?
Bartók, Concerto for Orchestra. That I heard. I mean, Ravel I'd heard all my life, but Bartók, when I heard Concerto for Orchestra when I was 15, because we were studying it for musical level, that revolutionized my life. And that really sealed my decision to be a composer, because I just thought, that is what orchestral music can be. That's what I'm going for. That's what I want. That's what, And it's always there in the background.
I mean, certainly composers that have gone before, and different pieces are different. Like I would say, there was one piece, Invocation, that I did, which was cello concerto, and I knew it was going to be paired with The Rite of Spring, funnily enough. The two pieces were going to be paired together. So even though it's not directly influenced by that, because I knew the sonic, because I knew what it was going to be in the realm of, it kind of that spoke to that piece in a certain way.
In what way?
Rhythmically, basically, it was dealing with the rhythm. What I felt in Stravinsky is that he really takes us to the edge of classical music rhythmically, and that borders on jazz. It borders on other forms of music from the diaspora, and so there's a connection point there. And even African music as well, rhythmically, he had a way of dealing with those kind of elements, but still within a classical form. He had a way of translating that language by changing the timelines and all of that. And that was very interesting, because now I was trying to bring an African language into classical music, and in particular in the Invocation I was drawing from the Yoruba tradition. My father's poetry, from the poetry and percussion group, I took chants from what I knew he does and introduced that into that piece. So it's again just stretching the form in a certain kind of directional way.
So in what way is Bartók influential to your music, do you think?
His respect, his love for traditional music, and how he translates the essence of traditional music into the rest of his music, whatever he's writing for. And his colors, his palette, the way he uses the orchestra, and the way he uses instruments. Rhythm. The rhythm is also so present. It is very,
So what does Ravel bring that Bartók?
Color. It's an orchestral palette that's much, I can't say much, that's very different. So wide, but so evocative. And also a lyricism in his writing. But at the same time, there is always this rhythm. You know, if you just think of the piano concerto for the left hand. The rhythm in it is just incredible. Yeah.
So do you think your music gets into bed with Bartók and Ravel?
I don't know if it gets into bed, but they're certainly around. So when I'm starting something new, I buy the Bartók or Ravel or whichever other influence might be sounding off somewhere off in the distance. And that's almost like, you know, that's a lighthouse, that's a sort of beacon. And I will start off writing, heading for the lighthouse, and end up on a completely different journey. But the essence has been what the lighthouse has been emitting. You know, it sends the important lights and the important messages. Maybe as a guide, it's not even as a guide. It's almost like as a great grandfather in whose tradition you want to walk, sort of thing. Yeah, I think that's.
If you analyse my music, there will be influences can be drawn from X, Y, Z, I'm sure, and that's for historians to sort of deal with down the line. I'm not going to do that now, but for me, it's more. It's almost like a playlist that I create as I sort of go through life, of a style that I like. I like energetic, fast-paced, exciting music, and if whatever I hear falls into that category, I sort of make a mental note of it, and that becomes something that may influence me. It's not specific to any type of sort of school or composer or artist.
The key is that even though I'm influenced by all those things and musicians, that's someone I would pull out in a particular way, but that was more to do with the coro, was a Brazilian composer, musician called Herbert Gismonti. And I remember I was first introduced to him by Orphy Robinson, because I saw a poster in his house and it said Herbert Gismonti and Nana Vasconcelos, and Nana Vasconcelos was an artist I had played and performed with, amazing Brazilian percussionist. And I said, oh wow, Herbert Gismonti, that's an interesting name. I didn't know who he was. And then he said, oh yeah, no, that guy is a don, you should see him, he's an amazing guitarist, blah, blah, blah. So then it turned out he was going to play at, I think it was Bracknell Festival, one of the festivals we were doing with Orphy's group, and he was going to be there playing solo. And I just remember I came, you know, sat down the back. He came on stage, not in any big way, sat down, got his guitar up, and then bang. Once he played, it was like power. The music had power from the first note, which is very hard to do in a solo show. And he did, I don't know, 20 minutes or I don't know how long with just solo guitar, and I was blown away. Then he put that down, then he walked over to the piano and did the exact same thing with the piano. And I was like, whoa. And when I came out of that performance, he made me think, I need to start again with the solo coro thing. Because there was just things I was like, you know, I need to, go back to the drawing board. Because the power he had, and it was a spiritual power within the music, that it was just immediate. I seen that concert and I knew I need to readdress how I see solo coro as a player, as a composer, and not be confined, not just have the traditional music of the coro as a reference, but start again from scratch. So it starts with just the dun 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 dun. It's a completely different approach to the usual coro pieces.
Do you think your music manages to escape those early influences, and if so, how?
You mean now? Yes, yeah, I would say that it has managed to move on from the early influences. I'm not too sure that I can describe how, but I'm just aware that it has a solidity. It has a solidity of its own now. It stands up for itself. It's like all of the different elements, all the different parts, all the different limbs feel like they're part of a whole body now. That is an independent, mature body.
The biggest aspect that has remained from the types of music that I've listened to is the sort of the visceral nature, I would say. Again, that doesn't pertain to a particular type of music. It's more of a vibe or sort of global feel that you might get from a piece, whether it's a very sort of high clarinet line, or the use of multiphonics, or the thumpiness of a percussive pizzicato line.
I think the similarities with what has gone before is that if you're an instrumentalist that plays certain instruments, it's likely to show in the way you write for things, and players will tell you whether it's idiomatic and easy to perform, or whether you haven't quite got it right technically. And so if you haven't got the technique right, it's a barrier to making the music.
It's how you flavour a piece and what the listener gets from it. You can look through composers in the sort of history of composition, and you can attribute certain things to composers, whether it's, oh, that chap was good at writing melodic lines, or, that person was great with their sort of vertical harmonies, they were very rich. For me, it's more creating a sort of rough and ready sound world that isn't, you can interpret it as you want, whether it's my own sort of where I grew up in an urban culture or the stuff I was listening to, but for sure it's to do with what I find to be interesting and beautiful to listen to. You obviously try and recreate. So for me, it's creating that sort of gritty sound world that is driven, that is exciting.
And have you ever been tempted to rebel against those influences? Because sometimes children have a tendency to rebel against their parents.
I suppose I don't consider it as rebelling. There are times when I've done very, very different things. And I've simply seen them as different. They were appropriate to whatever it was I was writing. And I had no qualms or no difficulty about sort of jumping into that other bath and going, that's what I'm doing.
I don't try to run away from my influences, but I just create music and they're all in there somewhere. But I don't deliberately take influences. Generally, I just do the music that I'm hearing, and then you can tell me what you think it's what I've been hearing or not hearing. The only exceptions being that I was asked to do a string quartet by the Brodsky Quartet, and they wanted it directly to relate to Beethoven's String Quartet No. 2, because the whole project was contemporary composers listening to one of his string quartets and responding, but not responding directly, but responding in terms of being inspired in any way you like. So you could respond to it or not respond to it, or be influenced or not. It was completely up to the individual composer how they engaged with it, but they had to engage with it in some way. And so I found that was one that was very interesting. And the other one was African Messiah, which is an oratorio, which had African influences, and of course Handel's Messiah was also an influence in the African Messiah. So so those two had direct influences, but mostly I try to avoid that and just go with the idea.
Do you think there have been aspects where you've been sort of almost over-influenced by, I guess a nice analogy would be, for instance, the conversation that you had with your mum about decisions about whether to be a musicologist or a composer, that sometimes I think we can have these sort of creative kind of disagreements with our respective influences. Do you think there have been moments in your sort of music making where that's happened in your composition process, where you've sort of felt that your parents, as it were kind of leading you in a different direction?
Yes, and sometimes it has been. It's interesting the way that you put it. Sometimes it has been almost difficult. It feels almost like you're tearing yourself away from home to go off in your own path. It's the first time I ever thought of it in that sort of light, and that's really interesting.
I'll come to that. There was one that I just remembered. There was one where I think someone, and it was to do with those boxes, someone said, they tried to say my style was quite minimalist when you said influences that I rejected. And then I think I had another piece to do, and this next piece was really dissonant and something else, because I think I wanted to be out of that box. So that's an influence that I ran away from. But coming now to this question. What was this question?
I can tell you again. Have there been aspects of your work that you consider to be derivative of those influences?
Yeah, I hope not. I mean, I think I don't run away from influences, as I said, but I hope that I have an originality. That's the most complimentary thing that people can say to me. And a lot of musicians have said it at different times, that it doesn't sound like somebody else. I think one of the reasons for that would be that I didn't study composition. So I don't have a precedent that I'm running away from. I just don't have a precedent. I just go with my ears in terms of, this is what I hear, that's what I write. So even orchestration, I didn't study orchestration. There was one point I was thinking of doing that, because I was supposed to work with a composer, Maurice Jarre, in a project, and then it didn't happen. And I was thinking, it'd be interesting to work with him, because he's a great composer and also orchestrator and all of that. But I don't regret that, because in a way, later other people have said I have a particular way of orchestrating. Again, I don't know what that is, but it's just my own voicing. Whereas I think when a lot of people have studied orchestration, it starts to affect their voice as a composer. So for better or worse, I don't have that.
Have you ever tried to compose music in a completely different style or genre, and what did you learn from that experience?
I have, and I've felt that they were genres whose technique I hadn't mastered, and I wasn't satisfied with what I produced. So I didn't continue. I didn't continue for reasons mostly of time, not having time to be able to master those skills, master the technique necessary to that. And so I just put it aside. I suppose what I would say also is that not being able to master something, or to master the technique involved in a different genre, I feel limited. I don't feel as if I'm able to completely express myself as I might have wanted to. So
I think the last time I did that was at university, where I sort of really went to town and wrote a piece which basically didn't use notation. It was in binary code, so zeros and ones, and the piece didn't even have instruments. It was basically devised, I think, after like a late night drinking session or something, where we had an array of different glass beer bottles, which we then proceeded to fill with water after they'd been emptied. And the piece was to drink from the bottle, and as you went along, I think the 0 was to blow and the 1 was to either take a rest or drink. And as you might imagine, as you sort of drank, the pictures changed, and yeah, it was an interesting piece, and as it worked quite well actually as a work. It was sort of sounded like a Bach chorale gone wrong. Nowadays, am I that sort of inventive? Probably not, in the sense that I know what I like, and I sort of try and improve on what I like, rather than try and start afresh every time. I think as you get older, you're known for the type of music you write. So if you're then going to turn around to a commissioner and sort of say, look, I've written this, I don't know, crazy piece that has no relation to anything that I've done before, they might be a bit perplexed and perhaps a bit nervous as to how they would make that work in their concert. Or
it's more about the idea. When someone brings me a new idea about, say, a piece that we're going to do, if it's a commission, it's like, what's the idea? What are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? And then we go for that. And then what comes into that from my background comes in, what doesn't. So I'm not running away, I'm not running to. But it's much more important what you're serving. I've always tried to challenge myself creatively that I'm not standing still. And one of the artists I loved for that was Coltrane, but also Miles Davis. There was something, he never stood still and he never went back. And I liked that thing of always moving forward, and then after a few years, start again. And I had that attitude with music, and now I carry it on even to other idioms. It's like, okay, now I'm going to do something I've never done. So every few years, I like to do something that I know, not that I can't do, but it's like, whoa, that's new, and then I have to do that whole learning process again.
Composing is very organic. You know, I don't think I'm so sort of jumpy that my likes and dislikes will change enormously across a span of my life or career. I can't see there being a limit to how it would influence my music, or how I would find ways in staying inspired by that sort of thing. Obviously, as I move through my career and life, I'm sure there'll be lots of other things that sort of come to light, or I might discover, or I might fall more into the background, and other things will come to the foreground. But your aesthetic, for me anyway, it doesn't change that much. I think my language has always been there, but you're sort of constantly refining it. You're constantly making it more representative of how you hear it inside your head.